I'm an uninteresting man in my late 20s with a stable job and a happy family. I never once entertained the notion that I might one day be the target of a stalker. So here's my story as a warning to everyone. You don't have to be a typical pretty young lady to catch the eye of a stalker. I don't know if this makes sense, but I am a habitual yet very casual Facebook user. I don't post a lot, but I do check my newsfeed often. One Saturday night, I was doing a quick round on Facebook before I went to bed when I received a friend request. I accepted it without hesitation. Just about every friend request I receive gets accepted because I don't ever post anything very personal. As I said, I have a very casual approach to social networking. I do a quick glance on the profile that had friended me and saw that it was obviously a fake account. Not thinking much about it, I put my computer away and fell asleep. The next day, I was having lunch at a friend's house, having completely forgotten about the friend request from the night before. My phone buzzed and I saw I had gotten a message from a coworker of mine, Maya. Although Maya and I worked together and had a few mutual friends outside of work, we didn't communicate much other than when it was about work. I checked it, assuming it was work-related, and I guess, looking back, you can say it was. To get the gist of it, the Facebook account that friended me also friended Maya, and had bombarded her with insults and accusations of being a whore and a slut, and every other name in the book. The person took it a step further by messaging Maya's husband, saying that she was cheating on him with a coworker. Maya wanted to know if I knew who the person was. I explained to her how I accepted every friend request and had no idea who it was. I then proceeded to unfriend the profile in question. Maya explained to me that she already had suspicions on who it was and just wanted to see if I could confirm it. Let's rewind back a few weeks earlier. I had received a friend request from Carrie. It struck me as odd because although we worked at the same place, we never actually met, never spoken, or even made eye contact within 20 feet of each other. We worked in different departments, but I had to walk through her department to get to our lounge. That was the furthest extent of our interactions. I only learned her name when she friended me on Facebook and I recognized her picture. I'm not sure how she found out my name. Carrie also friended my wife's profile and subsequently started sifting through my wife's posts and photos, liking and commenting on several of them. She began interacting with my posts as well, as though we were good friends. At work though, I would still walk by as usual and still no interaction. I found it odd, but I didn't think much of it. The mysterious Facebook account continued to harass Maya until she told the person that she knew it was Carrie and was going to call the police. I thought that was the end of that, but I was very wrong. Over several weeks, I began getting more friend requests from girls looking to hook up with me. Obviously, I knew they were all fake, and for the most part, I ignored them. I also began getting notifications from my Google and Facebook accounts about suspicious activity on my profile. Most of the time, it warned me of failed login attempts. One I specifically remember said my Facebook account was actually logged in from somewhere unusual and asked me whether or not it was me. It wasn't me, and I should have been more concerned, but for some reason I didn't care, which was stupid, and even after that I didn't bother to change my password. At the time I viewed all these activities as random isolated incidents. I had no valuable information on my account, and didn't have any private secretive messages. So what harm could a potential hacker do? A few months passed when one day, my wife gets a message from Carrie stating that she had a high-end video camera and was looking to start some amateur filming. She wanted to know if we would help her by letting her film our family for a day. Remembering what Maya had said months ago, I was reluctant but wanted to give Carrie the benefit of the doubt, so we agreed to tell her that we would schedule a time for whenever we weren't busy, and left it at that. Once again, I have yet to actually meet Carrie. More weeks pass by and we completely forget about scheduling the film shoot with Carrie when she messages me about it. I apologize about forgetting about it and turned her down when she asked to reschedule, suddenly feeling very uneasy about the whole thing. Then things got weird. She sent several gifs of stick figures doing sexually suggestive motions. I didn't respond, so she asked, "Funny, isn't it?" I immediately texted my wife to log into my Facebook profile to observe the messages. Not wanting to be rude, I agreed with Carrie as of the humor of the gifts and carried on the conversation. She proceeded to send me old photos from my abandoned MySpace account that I had completely forgotten about. It was around this time when MySpace had been revamped and people lost a lot of cherished memories. Somehow she dug mine up and decided to share them with me. Things escalated quickly from there. She began talking about her body and how she wasn't attractive, trying to bait me into complimenting her looks. She wasn't beautiful at all in the traditional sense, but she wasn't exactly hard to look at. I wasn't falling for it though. Then she hit me with something out of the blue. She asked me about my cock, and suggesting that it was probably really big. I decided that that was enough and stopped responding. Of course my wife was reading the whole time, and we were texting back and forth about how funny and weird this all was. I continued to go to work and still awkwardly never actually met her. I especially didn't want to strike up any conversations after that. Carrie messaged me one final time asking me for a favor. Maya had blocked her profile, and Carrie suspected that Maya was saying bad stuff about her, so she wanted me to check her profile to confirm. I told her that I wasn't going to spy on Maya for her, and that was that. Just between us though, I did check, and no, Maya couldn't care less to waste her time talking about Carrie. Around this time, my wife got a text from an unknown number. The person knew her name and was trying to remain anonymous, and was also trying to flirt with her. We were with a bunch of friends at the time, and we all thought it would be funny if we all text flirted with this person. Once again, I never thought to connect any of these occurrences. Carrie eventually quit work, and I continued to get suspicious activity that I stupidly continued to write off. I had pretty much forgotten all about Carrie. Then I would say over a year later, my wife drops a bomb on me. A good friend of ours started texting my wife, saying that I was sending very inappropriate messages on Facebook. I had been busy running errands all day and hadn't really checked my Facebook at the time. I found that my password had been changed, and when I finally logged back on, all my messages had been cleared. I had no idea the extent of what happened until I started hearing from more people that I was being very suggestive and nasty to them. The thing was, these were not random women on my friends list that were targeted. These were women that were close to me, good friends, my wife's sisters, and my friends' wives. These messages weren't holding back either. They went all out in graphic detail about what I wanted to do to them. I felt completely violated and humiliated. I couldn't imagine how the women felt. My wife and I were really close to our families and friends, and every other week or so, all of our friends would get together and drink, barbecue, watch movies or sports, and hang out. We've had several families over and never had a problem. All of them said they understood what happened, and that they knew it wasn't me. Deep inside though, I could see that they felt that it probably, potentially, possibly was me. Over time, more and more of them stopped coming over, to the point where my home started to feel empty. I confided in my wife about how I felt that they thought it was me, and she rebutted that I was being paranoid. She argued that our friends were just busy with their lives, and they would eventually come over again. I learned that someone had created a Facebook account using my name and picture, and continued harassing the same women. Some of them posted a picture of the conversations with me on Facebook. She commented that it really could be me, because that mystery person talked just like me, using the same vocabulary. She also stated that the person knew my friends and family extensively. My heart instantly shattered after reading that. I quit checking my Facebook for the longest time, and I guess I fell into a mild depression. I felt miserable. I told my wife that I wanted to disappear, and strongly considered quitting my job of 7 years and moving away to start over. I know now that I was being quite irrational, and thankfully my wife stayed strong for me through it all. I felt I needed to defend my honor, and started gathering alibis of times, people, and places I was around during the time of many of those messages. My wife brutally told me that she couldn't believe I was weak enough to let a no-life dumbass on Facebook put me down and make me feel that way. Which was true. I am and always have been a mentally strong person. I always look for the best in a bad situation. But for some reason this affected me differently. I can't explain why, but I felt extreme shame and guilt for something I didn't even do. Without my wife's support knocking me back to reality, I don't know what would have happened. We advised our friends to just ignore the person, and eventually everything stopped. From time to time I still get random friend requests, but I don't accept them anymore. I don't have any proof that this was all the work of Carrie. It just all happened during a time when she injected herself into my life. My friends have started coming over again, but it hasn't felt the same ever since. I don't know if it's them or just in my head. My wife and I came to the conclusion that Carrie reveled in the misery of others. After tormenting Maya, she moved on and targeted me, trying to ruin my marriage and distance me from my friends. And she did this for no reason other than the fact that she enjoyed doing it. I'm pretty sure she hasn't stopped and left me alone only because she found a new victim to harass.
Alright, now this is a story I haven't told in a long time. It happened to me in October, 6 years ago. I've told 4 or 5 people since then, and none of them believed me. I decided to stop talking about it when someone filed an anonymous tip to my school psychologist. That was 4 years ago. I've had a lot of time to think about it since then, and I think I'm finally ready to post my story somewhere. It's about a weekend I spent in the Washington National Forest. I had been planning this trip for weeks, made sure I had the weekend off, didn't make any plans, all of that. Started buying supplies a week before I went. I was going to go camping in the forest near my town. I had been camping before when I was a little kid with my parents, but never as an adult, never by myself, and never in this forest. I was so excited. Now, I'm not an idiot. I took all of the necessary precautions. I told a few of my friends where I was going, when I was going to be there, and when I'll be back. I told them if I go missing to call the cops and all that. I brought an extra phone battery and enough food and water to last me a week. I even brought the 9mm my dad gave me when I turned 18. Never shot the damn thing, but I figured it would at least scare off whatever the hell wanted to mess with me. I'm telling you all of this so you know that I'm not some dumb kid who decided he wanted to take a trip to the forest one day and piss his pants because he saw a bear. No, I knew what I was getting into. I was prepared. Just not for, well, this. Okay, enough backstory. I'll get on with it. I left around 6 in the morning. It's an hour drive from my place, so I was expecting to get there around 7. Ended up getting there at 7:30, but I didn't mind. It was a lovely day, not a cloud in the sky. Great weather. Camping in the cold and rain is miserable, so I was pretty content with my arrival time. I parked my car a ways away from the forest in a little clearing off the side of the road where I knew I would find it. I gathered my things, had a little snack, and headed off toward the forest. The next few hours are kind of boring, so I'll skip over them. All you need to know is that I made my way well into the forest, set up a camp, and started enjoying myself. Cooked myself lunch on the crummy campfire I made around noon, watched a pair of birds dancing at each other, and I even took a few pictures of some deer I saw with my phone. I couldn't get a good shot, but at least it's proof I was there. But something seemed off. You see, forests are normally kinda loud. Not like a city loud, but there's constant background noise that's always going on. Rustling in the bushes and leaves, birds chirping, and animals prancing around. When I first got into the forest, that was all well and good, but the later it got, the sounds just started to go away. Not all at once, it took the better part of the day for me to notice, but yeah, the sounds just slowly went away. Birds stopped chirping, bushes stopped rustling. I stopped seeing animals too. That's what made me notice at around 4 in the afternoon. I realized I hadn't seen a bird in a while. That unsettled me, truth be told. But I steeled myself and kept enjoying the stay. I was feeling kind of lonely, what with all the quiet and all, so I called up a friend and chatted with him until sundown. After that, I realized it was getting late, so I hung up, ate again, and put out the fire. After a final assessment of my surroundings and a look up at the wondrous sky, I crawled into my tent to sleep. I kept the 9mm loaded right next to where I slept, just in case, you know? Sleeping on the cold ground in the middle of the forest isn't that easy if you aren't used to it, and considering I hadn't done it since I was a child, I was having a little trouble. It was probably, and this is just a rough estimate, 2 hours after I had lied down that I started hearing something in nature again. Now, if I had heard bushes rustling a few hours earlier, this would have been cause for celebration. But even Bear Grylls would get creeped out if it was the only thing he'd heard all night. So I did what any rational human would have done and clung to the 9mm like it was the only thing keeping me from falling off a cliff. There was silence for a few minutes. The only thing I could hear was my own shaky breath. Then, prancing. 4 footsteps in quick succession, no crunching of leaves or snapping of twigs, just the steady beat. It was getting louder, closer to my tent. I tried to peer through the fabric that separated me from nature, but I couldn't make out a silhouette. I clutched the rifle harder, scared as any person would be. I remember being sure that I would be safe though. Even bears will rarely attack camps unprovoked. But that natural human fear, that was overbearing, making my mind wander and my hands shake. It stopped. Close to my tent, just outside of my tent, I could feel its presence near me. It was totally silent. I knew that it couldn't be a bear. It would be sniffing the tent right now if it were. I doubted that it was a deer. They don't come out at night. Perhaps a wolf? They normally travel in packs, and even if it were a lone wolf, it wouldn't be a threat until I heard growling. But nothing. Just silence. And then, it screeched. That's when I knew that that thing wasn't anything I'd seen before. Nothing makes that sort of sound. It was like a cross between some sort of bird and a human. Like the stuff you hear in movies that possessed people with their heads on backwards make. That's when I let fear take over, in my bladder and in my hands. I fired the gun in its direction, and dear God, was that a mistake. It screeched again, and it scratched the tent, tearing through the fabric, leaving a massive gash in the side. That was my first look. If you could call it a look. I barely saw a silhouette through the hole in my tent, but I did see its arms shredding the side of the tent. It was trying to get to me. I fired the rifle again, but it must have missed because it didn't flinch. That's when the flight reflex took over the fight, and I only wanted to do one thing. Run. I turned around and fiddled with the opening of the tent, trying to keep my eye on the beast, but also trying to secure my escape as fast as I could. I did it, and dove out of the tent, breaking into a full sprint. Behind me, I could still hear the thing tearing into my tent. I thought that maybe it mistook its enemy or prey for the tent and not me, but that relief didn't last long. I wasn't far from the tent when I heard its rhythmic prancing again. It was faster than me, gaining on me. If I tried to outrun it, I would surely be caught. Just then, in what was either a moment of survivalist brilliance or suicidal stupidity, I stopped and dove into a thick bush near me. I remembered that many predators in the forest rely on seeing movement more than anything else, so if I could stay still, then it would not see me. That decision saved my life. It ran past me, stopping in the same place where I stopped. I didn't notice before I hid, but that spot is just under an opening in the trees. A pillar of light penetrated the oppressive dark, and in the moonlight I could see my assailant. It was pale, made paler by the white of the moon, and hairless, thin, like it had not eaten in weeks. I wanted to say it looked humanoid, but comparing that thing to a human is just wrong. Its hunched back protruded out, making it look larger than any human. It stood on all fours in such a way that no human could, its rear low to the ground, its long legs bent in such a grotesque fashion that it almost resembled a frog ready to leap. It circled around, silently, searching for me. I thought it was about to give up, but it threw its horrendous back upwards and straightened its legs and stood. On 2 legs, like a person, a deformed, horrific human. And then it looked at me. It looked right at me. It saw me. I know it saw me. Nothing looks at you like that without seeing you. I could tell you the color of its damn eyes, and I bet you that it could tell you the color of mine. I clutched the rifle close to my chest, too scared to use it, too scared to move. I closed my eyes, waiting for it to pounce. And then, I opened my eyes, and it was gone. I didn't move for the rest of the night. I fell asleep in that bush, cuddling with the rifle until finally being awoken by the sound of birds. Birds. Thank God, birds. It was already daylight the next morning. I warily stood up, using the rifle as a crutch to support my aching body. Things seemed to be normal. The forest was speaking once again, and birds and deer aplenty were in sight. I stumbled back to my camp to find my things mostly as I had left them. My tent was unsalvageable. But I took my backpack, had something to eat, and I left, just like I had planned. The entire trek back, I didn't stop looking around for that thing. I didn't let the gun leave my hands either. It wasn't until I got to the car that I relaxed, calling my friend to tell him I was heading home. I didn't tell him about what had happened last night. I was still trying to process it myself. Hell, I don't even think I understand wholly what had happened until after the car ride home.
John Mueller, 26, died Wednesday, September 4th, 2013, in his home. He was a hard-working student and beloved son. The family wishes to keep the details of his death private. He will be missed. Amen. I read that in a shitty local paper called The News Flash. I thought it was a practical joke. My friend Curtis used to do pranks in grade school, so I called him up. He swore it wasn't him. He must have been lying. No one else in town cared enough to put that much effort into a prank on me. I almost forgot about the whole thing. Until November. John Mueller, 26, died Wednesday, November 12th, 2013, in his home. He took his own life after swallowing a handful of sleeping pills. He worked a dead-end job to pay off dead-end debts. He spent his free time lying in bed, staring at the ceiling. His life was short and somewhat pathetic. No one will remember he existed after a month or two. Good riddance. Amen. I didn't laugh this time. I called my friend Curtis, told him to knock it off. He swore it wasn't him. I called the local paper. No answer. I left a passive-aggressive message on the voicemail. I probably went too far when I insulted their shitty graphic design. The newspaper layout looked like it was done in Windows Paint. It was full of typos and repeated news stories every week. It was a piece of shit paper. The obituaries became a weekly thing. The paper was delivered to my front door every Saturday. I actually kind of looked forward to it in the beginning. Morbid fascination. But the details got bizarrely specific. I didn't have Facebook, so the only people who knew this stuff was Curtis or direct family members. I stopped talking to Curtis, and the obituaries kept coming. There's no way anyone in my family would write this stuff. There were dozens of obituaries all together, but I'll just be posting the relevant ones. John Mueller, 26, died Wednesday, November 19th, after slitting his own throat with a rusty knife. He could no longer handle the guilt of cheating on his university finals, and his student debt became too much to bear. He will not be missed. Amen. This was the first obituary which had a detail that I knew only I knew. Although technically I didn't cheat on a university exam, it was a college exam. I wrote notes on a ball cap lid. I never told anyone. Maybe the writer had guessed it. I'm not the first person to cheat on a test. I gotta be honest though, the increasingly disturbing nature of the obituaries unsettled me. I slept with the doors locked. I kept calling the local paper. No one answered. I must have left like 20 messages. I finally decided to go there in person. I followed the address in the contact info listed in the paper. It was on Main Street. My town was an American Walmart town. You know, one of those shit highway towns that used to have a busy little main street, until Walmart moved in. Now Main Street was dead and Walmart was busy. The American dream. Anyways, I drove to Main Street. It was dead silent. I almost expected a tumbleweed to drift across. Every single store was boarded up and run down. I parked in front of the newspaper building. It was abandoned. Shitty rich kid graffiti tags everywhere. I checked the address twice. There's that stomach drop feeling like you got caught doing something bad. I didn't really comprehend the situation yet, but I felt sick. I asked my neighbors and no one recognized the papers. Someone must have been writing up the entire paper and delivering it to my door every week just to fuck with me. I called the police to report a stalker. They opened a file, but I could tell they didn't take it very seriously. The obituaries got progressively creepier and more personal. They mentioned stories about obscure childhood events, teenage heartbreaks, jobs, etc. They often detailed myself committing suicide in some brutal manner. Hanging, self-drowning, swallowing broken glass, bathing in boiling water, to name a few. I finally decided to set up a camera and catch this fucker. They always deliver the paper to my front door. I got a shitty security camera from Walmart. I set it up before work. I worked a late shift that night. When I got home from work, a paper was on my doorstep. I took the SD card from the camera and brought it inside. I played the video. I fast-forwarded until the paper was on the doorstep. Then I rewound and played it forward. The front door opened a crack and a paper slid out from my house. The front door opened and someone from inside my house dropped the paper. I grabbed the paper and flipped to the obituary section. John Mueller, 26, died Wednesday, December 10th. He was murdered by someone who had been living in his attic for the past 7 months. That someone had been writing fake obituaries to John. John will be having a closed casket funeral due to the brutal nature of his death. Amen. Then I heard footsteps.
I looked at my bedside table, where my digital clock said 11:42. Yep, almost time for my usual sneak out. Before we moved 2 years ago, I would sneak out with my best friend Nikki every summer night at 11:45 sharp. I decided to keep that tradition. Well, except that I would sneak out with my cat, Ruby. It was almost ironic that we named her Ruby, since she was black from head to tail. While I ran around like a child, she would go find some mouse to chase. Little did I know that it was my fault she would die. It was that damn raccoon. The floorboards creaked as I made my way to my bedroom window. I was hoping my grandma wouldn't hear me, but she rarely left her room anyway. 11:45. I pulled the window up. The summer air greeted me, and I began to climb down the wall, using the bricks as my grips. Once I made it to the ground, I kicked off my shoes and ran barefoot to the middle. That was one of the perks of living in the middle of nowhere. Nobody would see me while I made a fool of myself. At the end of the meadow, I saw the fireflies. Oh, it was beautiful. But 2 of them were off. 2 of them were eyes. But they weren't scary eyes. They were almost welcoming. I tiptoed towards them. To my delight, I saw a cat. I held out my right hand for it to sniff. It pushed its head against my hand. Its fur was as black as the night sky, except for the end of its tail, which was white. It had a scar going across one of its eyes. "Aw, you poor thing," I said out loud. It brushed up against me, reminding me of Ruby. Its tail was curved. Crescent, that's what I'll call you. The nights after that, I brought up Ruby's leftover food. We almost had an agreement to meet at the meadow. The cat loved me, and I loved it. One night, I didn't need to go to the meadow. I found it waiting outside my window. "Hey, Crescent!" I smiled, tossing it a treat. It purred in response, and gobbled up the treat. I never saw it during the daytime. It was always at night. I began to question if I always had to meet it at 11:45. Maybe I could meet it earlier. So I tried. I pulled up the window and clamped down like I usually did. This time, however, it was 11:40. I ran to the meadow. "Crescent?" I called out. Crickets chirped, but no sound of meowing. 11:44. 11:45. There she was. She dropped a dead mouse on my right foot. I squirmed in disgust, but pet her head anyway. There was something that reminded me of Ruby. I just couldn't remember what it was. The next night, I decided to wait until midnight. Well, maybe not decided. More like fell asleep and was woken up at midnight. I woke up feeling Ruby lick my hair. She hadn't done that in years. "Ruby?" I giggled tiredly. But it wasn't Ruby. The window was open, and wind blew in. Crescent's big green eyes glowed in the dark. "Oh, I must have left the window open." I shrugged it off. I pulled the bag of Temptation's cat treats out from under my bed and held out one on my palm. Crescent started to eat it off my hand. It was fine until I began to feel her teeth dig into my flesh. Ow! I pulled my hand back. The treat hadn't been touched, but pieces of my skin had been peeled off. I grabbed the cat and climbed down. I shooed her and climbed back up. I woke up again at 1:53 in pain. Blood stained my sheets. The window was open, and a cat nibbled at my toes, exposing my bones. It wasn't Crescent this time. It was a brown tabby cat. I kicked it away and ran out of my bedroom. "Grandma?" I opened her bedroom door. I was never allowed inside, but I was afraid. I used to go to her when I had nightmares back when I was little. I nearly ran to her, but I tripped and fell to the floor. I looked to see what tripped me. It was a skeleton. A cat. All that was left was a red collar. Stitched on it was Ruby. I shivered. "Grandma!" I called out. She was in a rocking chair, surrounded by cats that feasted on rotting flesh. I couldn't take it anymore. I grabbed my keys and got in my car. I drove as fast as I could. What stopped me were glowing eyes in the backseat. I screamed and lost control of the car.
The House in the Shade. These events took place when I was 5 years old, in the rural South. You see, back then my family was always moving from town to town because of my stepfather's work. Among the memories I have of this time include some family secrets that we still don't really talk about. What I'm about to relate to you is one such untold secret we would rather forget. The modest white house we had recently moved into was surrounded by 2 large willow trees that blocked out the sun, leaving our backyard shadowed and apart from the rest of the world. My 2 older sisters and I would often swing from the branches and climb their thick trunks, while our mother and stepfather would sit on the porch and contentedly watch us play in the late afternoon. We would ride bikes, swim in the inflatable pool, fly kites, and run on the slip and slide. You name it, we did it. We were very active children and never left a beautiful day unfulfilled. Across the street were a few other homes, and the sweet older couple directly across from us would often sit on their own porch and wave and smile at us as they drank lemonade from a large pitcher and sat in old wooden rocking chairs. Our mother often waved cheerfully to them when we were brought outside, and their smiles and sweetness always made the day more pleasant. Until, that is, a few months after moving into the old white home, our mother got the 3 of us together, telling us there was something we needed to talk about as a family. She told us sternly that we were no longer to wave at the sweet elderly couple across the street. She went as far as to tell us not to even look at them, and if we saw them waving at us, we would come inside and tell her. This was an odd request to us. Nothing about the elderly couple seemed threatening or off in any way. Heck, our own mother was the one who always talked about how sweet they were, to be so friendly. So this request baffled us and continued to baffle us for the rest of our stay in this particular home. But we minded and no longer responded to the couple across the street. Soon they had been easily forgotten as we got on with our lives in our other homes in other towns. That is, until I was 16 years old, having a pleasant dinner, out with my sisters and mother. A rare occurrence for sure during this time of our lives. For whatever reason, over our evening meal, the conversation turned to that quiet old white house and the elderly couple across the street. As soon as the subject had been brought up, my mother's joyful face had darkened. Her eyes fell to her lap, and it took her a moment before actually addressing us. She told us that she had been afraid to talk about the subject all these years, especially while we were still living in the home. Afraid of needlessly making us afraid of staying in the quiet house in the shade of the willow trees. At that time, our stepfather had been working at the local Pepsi company, a well-paying job that allowed my mother to stay at home with the 3 of us while still making a modest living for our family. Apparently, one of his co-workers had actually lived in the house beside the willow home for nearly 6 years and had only moved out the year before. My stepfather and the man were talking about the neighborhood and the house, when at some point my stepfather mentioned the sweet elderly couple across the street that liked to sit on their porch in the evening and watch us kids laugh and play. The man looked genuinely puzzled. He said that my stepfather must be joking, just pulling his leg. My stepfather replied just as perplexed. With a sober face, the co-worker told my stepfather that there was no elderly couple living across the street. Sure, there had once been such occupants in the small home, but they had both died horribly nearly 3 years before from carbon monoxide poisoning. The couple's stove had leaked gas for days before they finally succumbed to the poisoning, and it took longer than that for anyone to find the dead couple. The man knew because he was the one who crossed the street to check on them, only to find the ghastly scene. He recommended we leave the house in the shade.
I would like to clarify a few things before I begin this story. This is a true personal nightmare that I had, and the events that followed after it are already past. So, with that said, everything in this story has come to fruition and is past, but I do not believe that will take away from the horrors that lie within it. With that said, let us visit the Green Asylum. I hope you enjoy. Finding dreams in my sleep is next to impossible now, but it wasn't always that way. One of the most memorable dreams I remember happened when I was just a very child and haunted me for a very long time. I found little in my lifetime that could explain what I witnessed and experienced during that dream, but I still remember it as one of the worst nightmares I have ever experienced. I have been forgetting many of the ones from the past, and I want to write this one down before I forget. With that said, let's begin recalling this twisted night. I was awoken in the middle of the night, sweating and in tears. I was scared awake by the lightning and rain that stormed just outside of my bedroom window. I glanced over at my alarm clock to gain some sense of what time it was. My clock showed 4:56 a.m. and further puzzled me, as the sun hadn't broken and everything aside from the lightning outside was pitch dark. I looked around in the darkness, trying to stand up out of my bed and gain a better sense of my surroundings. But as soon as I walked over to my alarm clock to see if it was properly set, my mother rushed into my room without warning, slamming my bedroom door in the process. She reached over and grabbed me without hesitation. "Come on, Adam, we're gonna be late." I had no recollection of any set date or meeting. There was no school today according to the alarm clock, and my mother's panic only further amplified my feelings of dread. I was forced to quickly dress in a pair of pants, slip on some shoes, and put on my best jacket. My mother thought I was delaying her and called out to me to hurry up. "Hurry up! We need to deliver this letter!" I ran to my mother's car without question and jumped into the back seat. We rode through the darkness and rain, the large droplets sounding off like beating hammers on the top of my mother's car. Every moment I was with her further added to my feelings of dread. We rode on into the distance, past my neighborhood, past all the flickering streetlights, and past all of the businesses in my town. We rode on through the seemingly desolate town with no incident. The streetlights were out, so my mother rode on through them and through the storm. She kept muttering under her breath about the letter. "Gotta get this letter out to them. I just have to. And only Adam can do it." We rode on past the businesses and on towards the border of Mexico. The trees rose around us as the water from the nearby river gave the growth sustenance and hid our surroundings from us. We drove on past the trees and made it to the border. An old man awaited us there and asked my mother for the passport. She immediately handed the document over to him, and he stamped the small booklet before handing it back to my mother. He asked my mother where we were going in Mexico. I knew very little Spanish then, but my mother's reply in Spanish only served to send a deep chill down my spine. "We are going to send a letter to the Green Asylum." The guard understood and nodded his head in approval, but looked at me with a face he would only bestow upon someone who was about to perish. I began to panic and tried to climb out of the car, but my mother fought to keep me calm and under control. We drove across the river and into Mexico, as tears began to streak more and more across my face. I didn't want to go there after hearing the rumors of that place. I'd only heard of such a place in rumors and legends, but anyone who was sent there never made it back. I looked to unlock the car and unlock my seatbelt so I could get out, but my mother pulled the vehicle over and tied my hands together with a zip tie to the door. As much as I fought my bonds and fought my mother with words, I wasn't going anywhere but with her. After a short drive down a long and muddy road through more ever-rising trees, we finally arrived at what my mother called El Verde Asilo, or the Green Asylum. The asylum loomed over us as an old Spanish prison that was outfitted to take asylum patients. The building itself appeared to be very old and lacked any proper care. With vines lining the sides of the building, it almost resembled a castle from another world and another time. It appeared lifeless from the outside. No lights or other indications of anyone inside. The walls of the asylum were cracked and showed their age. My mother rolled down the window and unlocked my door. In her hand was the letter she wanted to deliver and handed it to me. "Take this letter to the front door and slide it under the door." I looked back at my mother, my nerves preventing me from moving. "What happens when I give them the letter?" My mother grew to a boiling fury and screamed at me, "Get out of the car, now!" I stepped out of the car and slowly walked up to the asylum. I trudged along as I made my way to the door. My mother continued to scream at me from the car, "Watch out for the arms!" And as my mother screamed this warning to me, a hand reached out to me from the bars of one of the windows. The arm looked diseased, and the person beyond the bar was screaming at me in Spanish, "Come here, boy! Come to me!" I flung my body against the wall, inching my way slowly to the door, doing my best to avoid the outreaching arm. I took the letter and slid it partially under the door. I waited for a few minutes as I watched the letter under the door. I breathed in an air of relief when I saw the letter taken by someone beyond it. I finally felt a sense of relief and slowly started to walk back towards my mother's vehicle. But as I looked up, I saw my mother driving away. I screamed at her not to leave me. I began to run, screaming at her, hoping she would hear me. But before I was able to make it out to the dirt road, I felt a hand wrap around my waist, and that same arm that reached out to me covered my mouth, stifling my shrieks of terror and cries for help. No matter how much I struggled, my captor had me clasped in their grip. No amount of struggling would free me. I was dragged into the asylum by my captors and was thrown quickly into a wooden chair. Leather straps were bound to me, and the door slowly closed on me as I screamed in horror, begging for someone, anyone to save me. But my vision was quickly cut off by a blindfold to my eyes and a large slam to my head. I was a part of the asylum now, and they weren't planning on letting me go. This dream is one of the last few I remember from my childhood. The main reason I remember it so well is because it was the worst night terror I had ever experienced. The effects of the dream forced me awake screaming and caused my body to instinctively run directly off of my bed and into the inner walls of my closet as I broke the doors that were in the way. I have never experienced a dream as terrifying as this one, and I hope I never experience a night terror like this again. But I feel this is probably the one dream I will never forget, no matter how many more years I continue not to experience any dreams.
I remember it so clearly, the memories I had repressed for so long. How come my parents never spoke about this with me? How did I forget something so horrifying? To tell you the truth, it's not something I want to be etched in my mind, and I'm not quite sure why it is, but there's nothing I can do about it now. Not when I can see it so clearly. The sights, the sounds, the smells. Oh, the putrid smells. The year was 1985. I was only 11 at the time. I lived with my parents in Lebanon. I remember one night I was sleeping over at my best friend's house. Anthony was his name. How did I forget about Anthony? He lived alone with his father. His mother had died during childbirth, and I've got to say, his father was strict. But I guess he only wanted a polite son who was brought up properly. It was around 8 PM when Anthony and I were just finishing up eating. We were around the dinner room table when Anthony asked his father if we could go and watch TV. "Bad kids don't eat all their greens," his father replied. "But Dad," Anthony started saying when his father interrupted. "Bad kids don't eat all their greens." With which Anthony finished up his vegetables and stood up. Ahem. His father cleared his throat. "Bad kids don't have manners," he said sternly. "May we be excused, father?" His father nodded. We both left the table just in time to catch the end of some TV show Anthony was obsessed with. I don't recall the name of it. All I can remember is that it had something to do with puppets, which doesn't narrow it down much, I know. After the show had finished, Anthony said we should get ready for bed. He only had one bed, so we would have to top and tail. We got ready for bed, quickly ran upstairs, and settled down, ready to go to sleep. And then things got weird. Anthony had a clock next to his bed, and he seemed to be counting down the minutes, watching this clock intensely. "What are you doing?" I asked. No reply. "Anthony!" He turned his head slightly, seemingly keeping one eye on the clock. 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. 9 PM. Time for sleep, he muttered before turning over and closing his eyes. I lay there in silence for a minute or so, confused by what Anthony was just doing. And then I sat up, looking at him through the darkness. "Anthony," I whispered, "why were you staring at the clock like that?" No reply. "Why won't you talk to me?" "I'm going to ask your father to take me home." "No," he shouted under his breath. "Just go to sleep. We're already late." I was understandably confused by this, and he piqued my curiosity. "Late? What do you mean, we're late? Late for what?" I asked. Anthony sat up, looked me dead in the eye, and said, "Bad kids stay up late." He then laid back down and went to sleep. I didn't know what to make of this. I wasn't a bad kid. I never hurt anyone. I sure as hell never disrespected my elders. I was a good kid. I must have laid in the darkness for way over an hour, thinking about what Anthony had just said. The way he acted, as if out of pure fear. What was his problem? I thought to myself. Unbeknown to me, I was soon to find out. A strange smell began to fill the air, which, to my 11-year-old nose, was quite peculiar. But now, years on and thinking back, I could only describe it as having an acetone-like smell. I began to feel as though time was slowing down. I heard a little voice on the other side of the door whisper, "Bad kids stay up late." And then everything went dark. I awoke to the sound of crying children. I was laying on a hard, wooden surface, on what seemed like a bed which somebody had made from an old table. I looked around, wondering where I was, trapped in a small, blood-stained room, surrounded by small bones scattered around the floor. There was a cage hanging from the ceiling, with an old microphone inside it, and a clock on the wall next to some writing. Scratched into the wall, it said, "Bad kids stay up late." It was 3:45 and I could do nothing but sit on the floor, wondering what was going on. I was terrified for my life, all alone, trapped in that room for hours. I heard shuffling outside the door. The clock read 7 o'clock. I looked through the keyhole, and what I saw made no sense. There was a man wearing a bear costume. Was this some kind of sick joke? "Anthony," I screamed, "do you have something to do with this?" Typical. No reply. I could see the man in the bear costume moving around, pushing a cart, carrying plates and glasses. He disappeared out of sight for a split second, and then, as if appearing out of nowhere, he put his eye up to the keyhole, and I fell back, terrified. A smell, similar to the one in Anthony's house, began to fill the room, and then it went dark. I awoke sometime later to a plate of stale bread and a glass of water by the door inside the room. I just sat there and stared at it for a few minutes before there was a bang on the door and a man's voice said, "Bad kids don't eat their food." I wasn't going to touch anything that psychopath gave me. What if he had poisoned it? I'm not a bad kid, but I'm not eating that, I said. The door began to unlock, the sound of bolt after bolt clicking as the man in the bear costume unlocked them one by one. The door swung open and he flew at me, picking me up by my throat and slamming me into the wall. "Bad kids don't eat their food," he screamed in a muffled voice through the bear costume. He then threw me onto the bed, picked up a slice of bread, and began ripping off small pieces, stuffing them into my mouth, forcing me to eat. After both slices of bread were gone, he handed me the glass of water. "Bad kids don't drink their water." I didn't want him to pour the water down my throat. I was already in too much pain, and I didn't want to choke on the water too. So I took it from him and drank it all down in one big gulp before handing him back the glass. "Bad kids don't use their manners," he said, staring down at me. "Thank you," I replied, as if begging for my life. He then left, locking the door behind him, and once again, I was alone, staring at the bones on the floor. I need to get out of here, I thought to myself, looking for a way out. But there wasn't one. I was stuck behind 4 walls and a door. How am I supposed to get out of here? Shortly, I heard that voice again, booming from beyond the door. "Bad kids stay up late." I looked at the writing on the wall, and then at the clock. It was 9 o'clock. I didn't want to find out what happened to the bad kids who don't sleep, so I laid on the bed and closed my eyes. This went on for days, weeks even. I was alone all day surrounded by the sound of children crying and screaming for their parents all day long. I didn't have a toilet, so I would have to do my business in the corner, which eventually built up a putrid, sewage-like smell, mixing with the smell of blood and death that was already lingering in the air. 7 o'clock would come back around, and I would hear shuffling outside the door, followed by the familiar smell, and then darkness. I would awaken to a plate of bread and glass of water, which, unless I wanted to be force-fed piece by piece again, I would quietly sit down and eat before the smell would pour back in, and I would be smothered in the darkness once again. Waking up shortly after, I'd find myself pacing the room, staring at that clock. 7:30, 8 o'clock, 8:30, almost 9 o'clock, 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. Bad kids stay up late, I thought to myself, climbing onto my cold, hard bed. This was the first time in who knows how long that the man's voice didn't call out, reminding us we had to go to sleep. All of a sudden, I heard a blood-curdling scream coming from the other side of the building. Bad kids stay up late. Bad kids stay up late, I thought to myself, closing my eyes as tight as I could. The screaming continued for 4 solid minutes, and then another kid started to scream too. By now, the smell of smoke was pouring into my room. I jumped up and looked through the keyhole. There were piles of burning wooden furniture stacked against the back of the building, through the doors and into the rooms where I assumed the other children were. I never wanted to get out of this room as much as I did right now, but maybe I was safer in here. I heard shuffling outside and instantly ran for the bed, hiding under it. And there it was. My way out. How had I not noticed this before? I mean, the bed was pretty low, but I never even thought to look. Here it was the whole time. A vent. I didn't know where it led, and I didn't care. All I knew is I had to get out. I began pulling and scratching at the vent, but it was screwed on tight. I decided to crawl from under the bed, grabbing the largest of the small bones scattered around the room. I had to try and jam it behind the vent and break it off. After 4 or 5 attempts and 3 of the bones breaking into small fragments, the vent came loose, and I wasted no time climbing in. I have no idea how long I was in there, my face pressed up against the cold, solid base of the vent, the sound of children's screams crying out for help. I must have blacked out because the next thing I remember is the unsettling silence that filled the air, the smell of smoke and burning flesh still lingering. I looked out from the vent, and my door was still closed. I somehow managed to avoid the flames just outside this room. I climbed out from the vent, walked up to the door, and peered through the keyhole. The whole place was still. The fire had long since gone out, and there was no sign of life anywhere. This was my chance to escape. Finally, freedom is within reach. I crawled back into the vent and started exploring, frantically searching for a way out. But it was badly damaged. Around every corner was a dead end, or a bend upwards, and there was no way I could climb that. I must have been stuck in that godforsaken place for days. No food, no water, nothing. Just the sound of silence and the rotten stench of excrement and smoke still lingering in the air. The loneliness was driving me insane. And then, there it was. That unmistakable sound of shuffling outside my door. I dived into the vent, holding it closed behind me. On the other side of the vent was the sound of somebody forcefully breaking the locks. Was it him? Did he notice I wasn't in the room? The doors slowly opened and a person walked in. I could only see his legs through the gap in the vent, but he wasn't wearing a bear costume. I wasn't taking any chances. I stayed right where I was, and after a minute or so, the person left, and the door was left open. I waited a couple of minutes, just to make sure they weren't coming back. Then I crawled out of the vent, left the room, and made a dash for the exit. I ran through a metal rusty door and into the street. I was in the middle of nowhere. I decided there was only one thing for it. I had to pick a direction and commit to it. So I did. I was walking for what seemed like hours, when, in reality, I was probably only walking for 20 minutes, when I heard the sound of cars. Lots of cars. I was near a road. I had to get help. I ran towards the sound of cars, waving my arms about in the air like a child possessed. "Help!" I screamed. "Help me, please!" A car pulled over to the side of the road, and out stepped a young woman, asking me what was wrong. I briefly told her about what had happened to me. She was horrified and said she recalls seeing me on the news. She offered to take me to the local police station. I looked into the back seat of her car to see she had 2 children of her own. "No, please, just take me home," I pleaded. The woman opened the back door of her car, waited for me to sit down, and then closed the doors before sitting in the driver's seat. After giving her my address, she began to drive. I was silent the whole way home. Upon arriving, I jumped out of the car, paused, turned to thank the woman, and then ran up my garden path, slamming my fist repeatedly against my front door. Both of my parents came running out, and tears started to fill their eyes. I went inside with my father, and my mother went to speak to the woman in the car. When my mother came inside, I told both of my parents about the whole ordeal, and they rang the police. The police took a statement, and a description of the man in the bear costume, and a manhunt for a murderous psychopath soon followed. We skipped town, and soon moved to a quiet place in Canada. The last I heard, the man in the bear costume had never been caught. After escaping to Canada, I must have blocked everything out of my mind until today. I went to high school, met a wonderful girl named Julia. We both graduated, got married, and had our own little baby, Connor. Fast forward to today, August the 14th, 1999. For days, Connor, now 6 years old, has told me countless times about this TV show he's been watching. He said that if you write to the address shown on TV, he could go and play games with the host. I told him for days up to this point it was out of the question, but eventually I gave in to him. "Okay, the next time the show comes on, call me, and I'll come and have a look." I wanted to at least see this show. If I was going to send my only son along, I wanted to know what I was signing him up for. Sure enough, today, he called me, and everything came flooding back. Dad, this is the show. Can I go on?" Connor shouted in excitement. What I had been faced with shook me to my very core. On the screen was a guy in a bear costume, sitting in a chair talking to the audience. "Hello kids, do you want to visit my cellar? If you do, please write me a letter to this address."
I live about 20 miles from the city in which I work. I live out in the country, and about a short walking distance from my house is a highway, and on the corner is a 24/7 gas station. Well, last week on a Saturday night, I went by there right before midnight to grab some Cajun peanuts. I see one car parked on the side, which is normal. It is usually just a guy working, and rarely any customers at this time. Do you ever feel this dread overcome you, like you know something is wrong? Well, I walk in and don't see anyone, nobody behind the counter or in the store, so I take my time and assume they are in the bathroom or are in the back of the store. Surely they heard the chime on the door when I came in. I am feeling weird and uncomfortable, so I wait a minute. Even though it seemed like forever, so I call out, "Anyone here?" I wait a minute more and put the peanuts down and walk out the door. I checked the car parked on the side and there was not anything troubling. I even glanced on the back side of the store and there was nobody. I'm pretty uncomfortable, so I just call the police. They then show up 10 to 15 minutes later. and they search the place. They find the cashier dead in the men's bathroom, beaten to death. They called him back up, asked me to recap what I experienced, and then I went home. And that isn't even the messed up part. So I get home and my dog is in the front yard taking a piss and just staring at me. And my front door is cracked open. My heart is racing, so I grab my dog and head back to the gas station and let the police know. They send one of the guys to search my house. Nothing is stolen or out of place, but there was sign of forced entry. So this was last week, and about 5 hours ago, I get a call from my brother, who works for the county sheriff's office. Supposedly, they pulled the camera footage, and about 10 minutes before I walked into the store, someone came in, started punching on the cashier, and then dragged him into the bathroom. In the footage, you can see me walk in and look around, then call out, and then you can see me walk out and check out the car, walk to my vehicle, and make a call. About the time I'm in the vehicle, the alleged killer walks out of the bathroom and sneaks out the back door, and before leaving the view of the camera, he takes off in the general direction of my house. Fortunately, my wife was out with some friends watching Beauty and the Beast, but I'm convinced that I missed a murderer at the gas station and he broke into my house. This week I had a new security system installed alongside a new front door, but I'm pretty sure whoever did this is still out there.
There are lots of stories about how people die. Death is very intriguing because it is something everyone will experience, yet no one has ever experienced, because as soon as you have undergone death, there is no more you to have experiences at all. But this isn't the story of just anyone's death. This is the story of how you die. One of you will go like this, but it will be a similar story for the rest of you when your time has come. And there won't be any bells or choirs, no light at the end of the tunnel, there won't be any voice calling you home or crying ancestors welcoming you with open arms. I know, because that's not what happened when I died. Your death will be like this. Next week, you're going to be killed when a drunk driver T-bones your car at 65 miles per hour. You'll know that's how fast he was going because you'll hear the police reading his broken speedometer after they pronounced you dead. There will be a shard of glass that went straight through your right eye and out the back of your head. Contrary to most people's opinion, discovering you are dead won't be as traumatic as you might expect. It turns out being disconnected from endorphins and adrenaline and surging blood pressure and all that messy biological stuff makes everything quite calm. But you won't feel dead. You'll feel hollow. It's like you're sitting alone in a dark theater, watching a movie of your own death, and the more time that passes, the dimmer and quieter the movie will become. I don't know if you will die right on impact, or whether this is just the distorted senses of your oxygen-deprived brain as you bleed out on the ground. I just know that pretty soon it will be dark, peaceful, and quiet, and soon you'll probably be okay if that was the end. But it won't be the end, and you won't be alone. When all the light is gone, there will be something moving in the darkness around you. You'll have no body or voice to scream with. You'll just be a single thought, being pressed in on all sides by the suffocating presence of something that's been waiting for you your entire life. Oh, and here's a fun little fact to look forward to. It turns out pain is more than a firing neuron. It's an integral part of the conscious experience. And even when your body is gone, the consciousness that remains will still feel pain. The presence around you will crush you into oblivion until the pain becomes so intense you can't even think. You'll just have to wait for this part to be over. And you're going to be waiting a long while, because the perception of time is something you'll have left behind. This pain is all there is, all there ever was and all there ever will be, because somewhere, in the beginning, that which existed was separated from that which does not, and the void has never forgiven you for leaving it behind. But when it does end, and it will end, because I'm here now, and you're going to be asked a question, and you better be ready for it, because if you don't answer the question, the eternity is going to begin once more. Just one question determines whether or not this will ever end. And if you answer right, you'll get to go again, and you might even recall some of it like I did. And if you answer wrong, then there's nothing good you've ever done that will spare you from what's coming. And the question is, will you bring more people to take your place? And I said yes. And I have. And I'm not done yet.
Hello? Is this thing on? I'm going to tell you something. Something not scary. Not if you follow these instructions. Start up the video. Stare at the screen until you hear it. When the chanting starts, listen to it. Listen. 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 When the chimes start, shut your eyes. Listen. Drain anything and everything out. If you want to keep your sanity, open your eyes before the next chime. When you hear them again, do not open them. No matter what you feel, no matter what you see, do not open your eyes. You will hear dates, specific dates. You can see their faces. Don't open your eyes. Don't open them for anything. Listen to the dates. Every time you hear the chimes, switch between open and closed. On the last part, no matter how long, keep them closed. No matter what. Don't even move. Don't do anything until you hear the broadcast woman's voice. Then close the video and clear your history. If not, it will follow you.
Their pale faces were tilted skyward, each pair of eyes brimmed with hope. In the moonlight, their skin seemed luminous, a battle of bright flesh against the surrounding darkness. Their mouths were slightly open, as if expecting to receive Holy Communion. They stood in a circle on the mossy ground, hand in hand. Their open throats drooled blood down their young chests. Under my bare feet, the moss felt so comforting, so inviting. With the children standing guard, I would curl up on the ground and fall asleep. That was 25 years ago. It was my nightly ritual. I'd sleepwalk to the clearing in the woods outside our home and sleep next to the 5 children. No one noticed I came home at dawn. No one would have cared anyway. After I turned 14, it had all stopped. I assumed it had to have been a recurring dream. Yes, I sleepwalked nearly every night. Yes, I spent those nights in the woods, but no children were ever reported missing. There were no slit throats, just trees and moss. Lots and lots of moss. I moved away when I turned 19. As the years went by, the memories grew hazy, as they want to do. Certain things trigger them though, some more strongly than others. Lately, it's been open mouths. The open mouths of children were always a source of fascination for me. I wasn't put off by their slit throats. I wasn't disturbed by their warm, skyward stare. No, their mouths were the source of my inquisitiveness. I would walk around their circle, moss brushing between my toes, and look inside their mouths. They looked warm and soft, pink tongues and small teeth, and narrow throats. When I was 8, I kissed one of the 2 girls, the redhead. Her lips were full and tasted like pine. I felt my breath collect in her mouth and spill back into mine. She didn't move. My body sang. I tasted pine for years afterward. No kiss since has ever been so enthralling. The decades passed with a growing sense of unfulfillment. When my parents died last year, I moved back into their home. It was very much the same. Now I go about my day-to-day business, but the children are still very much in my mind. The softness of the moss against my skin and the sense of protection I had as I slept near them has been impossible to shake. My nostalgia has only grown since returning to the home near where it had all happened. Some nights, I walk to the mossy clearing. It's as beautiful as it always had been, especially when the moon is full, and I recall it shining against porcelain skin and bright eyes and wet mouths. I'll curl up on the moss and sob myself to sleep, alone. I've found some solace in cultivating that same moss. It's the only tangible remnant of that comforting time in my life. I've been able to coax patches of it to grow in my dirt floor basement, and that's where I sleep now. There, in the moss, in the comfort of my home, I can dream again. The dreams are a temporary fix, but better than nothing. They'll be enough until it can happen again. I know it will. The first child I claimed is a girl with red hair. The bulb in the basement doesn't look like moonlight. Its yellow hue causes her skin to look sallow and sickly. Her eyes are clouded and difficult to keep open. The gaping throat is the same, though. The throat keeps the memory real. And before I curl up next to her pinned feet and sleep, I make sure to kiss her open mouth. I fantasize about pine as the taste of metal coats my tongue.
When I was about 13, my parents and I moved to an old house. It was at least 90 years old. It was large and in pretty good condition for a house that old. I was an only child. I got the second biggest room on the second floor, and that room was huge. Sometimes my parents left me at home by myself for a few hours. Whether they were going shopping or on a date, I always asked to stay at home. I didn't mind staying at home because I liked to think of myself as responsible and trustworthy. It made me feel special. One night at around 6 p.m. or so, my parents had to go run some errands. They were the kind of people who spent long hours out shopping for the best deals, and they used a lot of coupons on whatever they could. And I didn't want to be involved in this at all, so I decided not to come. I stayed in my room and watched some TV. Then, at around 8 p.m., I got hungry and decided to get a snack. Now at this point the house is very dark, so I grab my cell phone and use it as best as I can to light up the hallway, since the hallway didn't have a light. Now this was before cell phones had built-in flashlights, so I just used all the light my screen could give until I made it to the kitchen. The kitchen light had been left on by my parents. I put my phone on the counter. As I was walking to the pantry, I saw a man hunched down in the corner by the back door. He was wearing black and red clothing, and he had long, greasy, unkempt hair. I didn't see his face because his head was facing the wall. He was holding a large knife. He didn't notice that I had spotted him. I wanted to scream, but I used my hand to cover my mouth and walked back upstairs, leaving my cell phone down there. I was not walking over to get it. We didn't have any phones upstairs, so I walked into my room, locked the door, and I hid in my closet. I started crying silently and started thinking the worst. He was going to find me and kill me. I just knew it. Then I heard someone coming up the stairs. I felt sick and I had never been so afraid in all my life. Then I heard someone open the door to my parents' room, which was 2 rooms away from mine. I then hear police sirens outside and I hear the door being knocked on. I breathe a sigh of relief. I hear the man running back down the stairs quickly and he's trying to open our back door. Then I hear our front door being pushed down and I heard footsteps of 2 people coming upstairs and they start searching our home. The police come to my room and let me know it's safe. I opened the door. I later found out that our neighbors saw this man unlocking our back door with a key and saw that he had a knife and called the police. My parents arrived a few minutes later and my mom started hugging me and crying. The man unfortunately escaped. I cried and I got no sleep that night. Because the man had a key, we changed the lock, but we eventually moved way out of state. I'm 23 now. I have moved past it, but there are several questions I still have. How did he get a key? Why did he want to come to our house? And what would he have done if the police showed up any later?
Get on any passenger bus that travels a long distance. Greyhound is usually a good pick. Anything that's on the road for longer than 24 hours. Get a window seat facing west, then stare at the sun, waiting until sunset. Just before the sun touches the horizon, close your eyes. Hard. Do not turn away. Don't look at anything else. Cover your ears if you have to. After a while, you'll notice that the bus has stopped moving. That's the signal that you can open your eyes. When you do, you'll see a gas station, illuminated only by a few flickering fluorescent lights. There will be no sun, no moon, no stars in the sky. The convenience store will have its windows boarded up, but the sign will say open. If you feel you can't go through with it, get back on the bus, return to your seat, and fall asleep. You'll wake up at sunrise the next day, well on your way to wherever the bus was going. If you enter the store, the door will slam shut behind you. You will spend an unknown amount of time there, living out your worst nightmares made real. If you survive the ordeal without going mad, you will awake back on the bus as it reaches its destination. Nothing will ever scare you again. Some say that after this ordeal, anything else simply pales in comparison. Others say that all that room contains is all the fear you will ever live in your entire life, and exposing yourself to it all at once keeps you from feeling it anymore. This, however, can only be done once. There are some exceptions to the ability as well.
Deja vu. I was there as you drew your first breath, watching as they cradled you in their thin, bony arms. You were so beautiful, a divine being among mere peasants that didn't see all I did, didn't feel all I felt. I could tell my little godling was going to be far more amazing than their puny minds could comprehend. We became friends for a while. I was always there for you, and you for me. It was like Elysium had come at last to my old soul. It was exhilarating. I loved you and lusted over you. But society warped and twisted you. It made you question, even just a little bit. You still question the paranormal. Eventually, you found your way back to me through the internet sites and your friends talking about scary stories. That is what made you remember me. You knew I was real, at least at one point in your life. So you went on your computer, locked yourself in your room, turned off all the lights, and started some ritual that you read about online. I was intrigued by it and the complexity of it all. And when you finally set the small skeleton of a bird down next to the top of your makeshift altar, I felt the pull. I hadn't felt it in ages. Years had gone by, practically death, wondering where you were or if you wondered about me. I had to know if your mind had resurrected thoughts and feelings I instilled within you oh so many years ago. So I came forth. You were startled at my appearance. I couldn't blame you. I was a smoky black figure, wearing a cloak over my thin, frail body, with mangled feathered wings. You tried not to scream, and I wondered at why you screamed in the first place. But then I realized I'm not what you're accustomed to seeing. I pressed my long, bony finger that ended in a claw up to my lips to shush you, and it worked. You stared at me in horror, and I knew I had to get you out of there. Come, my dear, I spoke without speaking, in a whispery voice that soothed you as it enveloped your shaking form. It is time for you and me to be reunited. You fell unconscious, and I waved my hand across the room, wiping all trace of your existence from your home. Your family and friends would never know you were gone, if you'd never existed. I mean, you did, but any time anyone would try to remember something, they just couldn't. It was because of that, because I changed reality itself, so that you could return home with me, to the very lucky and few people like us. I gave you a new home, a new life, all in that instant. Not many people get that kind of experience, you know. Well, not that you would. Have you ever went to a room and forgot why you were there in the first place? Or thought of someone, maybe like a brother you never had, and just thought it was a dream? Or thought you heard someone call your name? All of those times, it was people who had been taken away by creatures like me. You simply call it deja vu. When you awoke in your new black clothes, and your new home, in your new world, I remember how shocked you were. You were so happy when you met all those other kids like you. You were so excited and nervous. So much like when you opened gifts from your family and friends on holidays and special occasions. It was beautiful. And now, here you are today, in yet another new life. I'm sorry to have told you all this, and tricked and lied to you all those years. But the reason why you may not feel like you don't quite fit in with your family is because you never were theirs. You were mine. And the other families, no one else's. And now you're just like me. So go, my child, and help make others like us.
I tell myself I'll stay clean tonight. No more of that shit. None. Done. Cold turkey. It ends now. I'm not putting that stuff in my veins ever again. I'm tired of skulking around dark alleyways at night, looking for a fix. Looking for that one guy or gal to get me hooked up with what I need. This thing eats you up. Changes everything, ruins your life. I used to be a regular church-going guy. I haven't seen the inside of a church in 2 decades. Doubt I ever will. I used to look good when I was clean. Now, shit. Sallow skin, pale. It fucked up my teeth like you wouldn't believe. I look like I haven't seen daylight in 20 years too. I smell like dirt. Nobody invites me in. Man, before I used to be obsessive about my hair, my clothes. Now I can't even look myself in the mirror. The addiction? Let's call it what it really fucking is. Hunger. The hunger eats at you, claws at your insides, tears away at what made you human. Speaking of hunger, you know what I miss most? Italian food. Garlic bread, all that stuff. I loved my normal life. I miss my normal life. Learn from my fail, everyone. Steer clear of them. One day you meet the wrong person, find out they're a fucking vampire, and bam, nothing is ever the same. Ever. Forever. And ever.
Hey you. Yes, you. The reader. The person I'm telling this to. I want you to try something that I bet you never did before. I want you to just sit in silence for 30 seconds. If you're playing any music, stop it. If you're playing any videos, pause it. If you're wearing any earphones or headphones, take them off, just to get as clear sound as possible. Now, I want your immediate area around you to be as quiet as possible. Now just sit in silence for 30 seconds, and when you're done, read the next paragraph. I'll wait for you. Now that you sat in silence for 30 seconds, you should have just heard the AC unit, or some outside noises that you can't control. Don't worry. That is okay. But that wasn't what happened, was it? No. You heard something faint. Something in the back of your head that you're so familiar with, but you can't quite explain. You heard a ringing in the back of your head, didn't you? A monotone pitch playing in your eardrums at a deafening tone. Now, don't panic, but that sound is not coming from inside your head. If you look around while still sitting in silence, you'll notice that the sound does get clearer when you look in a certain direction. That's where the sound is coming from. Here is where the risky part comes in. If the sound is coming from outside of your window, day or night, then you're safe. It's outside everyone's home, and if you don't hear it, then that means it happened there before. But if you hear it coming from inside your house during the day, then you're safe. Just don't sleep in the same house at night. Lastly, if you hear the sound coming from inside your house at night, there's nothing you can do to save yourself anymore. The police won't believe you. If you run, it'll catch you immediately. The longest chance you have for survival is to just sit where you are, in silence. And even then, you'll only have a couple of hours left to live. In fact, the only thing I can do for you is to ask you a simple question that only you know, so you can help everybody in your situation. Please, answer it fast. Why do people disappear?